At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Good morning. Welcome to the Eastman Financial Report. I'm Dan Eastman, your host, and today is Wednesday, July 23rd, 2025. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we appreciate your viewership here at the Eastman Financial Report, as well as across all of the fine broadcasting you'll see throughout the day on Worldview Tube, and of course, listening on Worldview Radio. As you know, we've been broadcasting in this Christian ministry since 2006, and it's our passion, our ministry, our mission to be able to bring the top topics of the day to the great marketplace of ideas from a Christian perspective. And that's what we do here. And we've been doing this consistently since 2006. And of course, we are very much interested in continuing this until the second coming. So it's important for us to be able to bring all of this information into what is an ever-expanding marketplace of ideas from a Christian perspective. And of course, we look at that marketplace of ideas. What that means in English is effectively an ever-expanding place, forum, where thoughts and viewpoints and ideas are expressed. And as technology has allowed more people to enter that marketplace and express their ideas and their thoughts, it's very important that we keep our Christian perspective front and center. And that's what Brandon House has been doing for decades. And that's what we're doing here on Worldview Tube and Worldview Radio, is that we are continuing our ministry to keep that information coming from a Christian perspective. Now, if you'd like to help us in that ministry, we would really appreciate it. There are a couple of ways you can do that. The best way is to go to worldviewfoundation.com, and you can click on it. Here's the website on the bottom of the screen, www.foundation.com or worldviewfoundation.com. Takes you to the same place. And you can make a donation. One-time donation helps. It certainly helps us keep our ministry alive and fresh. You can also sign up for repeat donations, repeating cyclical, like monthly, and that helps flatten our revenue curve so we can better match our costs to our revenues, and that helps us keep our content free of charge. As you know, you're watching me and you watch throughout the day, you don't have to pay a subscription fee or, all sorts of a paywall. No, our mission and our ministry is to bring this information to that marketplace of idea free of charge, just like the apostles did 2,000 years ago when Saints Peter and Paul were wandering about the Middle East spreading the gospel. They didn't charge admission. This was a gift freely given to all those who would hear, and we want to continue in that tradition these 2,000 years later, and you can help by doing that. So if you make a donation, you are certainly helping us keep this information free and free of charge and alive and vibrant throughout this great marketplace of ideas. You can also help by shopping with and purchasing from companies you see advertising throughout the day on our network. Now, unlike most places, we don't sell blocks of advertising time. Rather, we partner with good, solid companies that we know and trust. And when you do business with them, when you buy their goods and services, a small portion of those proceeds comes back to us in the form of a commission. And that also helps us establish and sustain our revenue so that we can continue our ministry. So that helps a lot when you do business with the companies you see advertising on our network. The third way you can help is to go to worldviewtube.com/vault, and you can subscribe to the vault. Here's the address right here on the bottom of the screen, worldviewtube.com/vault. And effectively what that is a little bit of a pay involved. You pay a fee, but you get access to all of Brandon Howe's ministry and materials that he's created over the last 20 plus years. His books, his seminars, his conferences, all those videos are in there. We have some amazing interviews with Christian thought leaders, some of whom have already joined the Lord. But those interviews are prepared and they are preserved in perpetuity, or at least until the second coming. And you can see those. And it's very fascinating to be able to see the thoughts of Christian thought leaders encapsulated and captured for your viewing on demand. And that's the cool thing about the vault. If you're sitting up at 2 in the morning and you can't sleep, you go to your subscription at the vault and you can, read great information. You can see great videos. You can actually even see reruns of the Eastman Financial Report, which are right inside the vault. So if you want to check my work or call me out, subscribe to the vault and good luck, because everything I say comes true. So the point is, if you want to help us out, you can make a direct donation, or you can do business with the companies you see advertising, or you can subscribe to the vault, or you can do all three. It's up to you. But in any event, we appreciate your viewership first and foremost, and we appreciate any support and help you can give us in keeping this ministry alive and fresh and global. So thank you very much. Okay, let's talk about the news today. And of course, like I say, in the middle of summer, we're getting to be the dog days of summer, where Wall Street and Washington take a little bit of a breather, and from Washington's perspective, they should take a long breather. But the point is, things slow down, and we do have some information. And one of the things I want to talk about today are the existing home sale numbers have come out from government, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and effectively what we see in June. Remember, these numbers come out monthly, and we're looking at existing home sales. These aren't new manufactured homes or built homes. These are used houses, basically people that are putting their house up for sale. And what we're seeing is the existing home sales number is down 2.7% in June. It was up just a little bit from April to May. Well, not from May to June. It's down 2.7%. And that means it's flat year over year, because the year over year number is 12. It's a 12-month rolling average. So effectively what we're seeing is the existing home sales are down 2.7%. And keep in mind, when you're an economist or a financial analyst, you plot data on a timeline, and one change does not a trend make. So we might be up 1 month and down 1 month. And what we're looking at is over time, the slope of the curve. Is it tending to go up or is it tending to go down? And what we're seeing with these numbers is, while we had a drop in June, it's flat year over year. It's not going like this, it's not going like this, it's flat. So what it tells us is the existing home sales market has been flat, and it's been flat for a number of years, ever since the Biden administration decided to raise the interest rates and basically shut the housing industry down. And this is a real problem, because this is a lingering problem in the American economy. And President Trump has been pushing this issue quite hard. If you're following the news, he's going after Chairman Jerome Powell and saying, cut the rates. We need to stimulate the housing market, because the housing market is about 40% of the American economy. If you think about the GDP that I talk about, gross domestic product, well, about 40% of that big ball of activity has to do with the housing market, whether it's construction or remodeling or redecorating or painting the walls or whatever. That's a big chunk of the GDP. And by having a sluggish and stagnant housing market, it effectively keeps sort of a wet blanket on the American economy at a time when we'd like to see robust growth. We're not seeing that because the housing market took the biggest hit. And it's an interesting thing. When you look at the numbers reported this month, not only are the sales down, but the median price of the homes that did sell. It's not like the market stopped. It's just that, it's shrinking in its volume. But the existing homes that did sell are at a record high of 435,300. That's the median price. That means there's as many below that as there is above that. But we track the median price, and this is at a record high of $435,300, probably some change. But this is a really troubling situation, because as demand is declining for existing homes, the price of the existing homes continue to go up. And I've been sort of talking about this over the last 2 weeks, and I'm sort of going back and forth with some really bright people on X. You join those, you start commenting on each other's comments, and before you know it, you're trapped in that world. But I'm talking or dialoguing with some very intelligent analysts. These people really know what they're talking about. But it's kind of fun. And one of my little add-ins was the fact, why are those housing prices going up when aggregate demand is dropping? If the classical Adam Smithian world of supply and demand, you would think when demand falls off, if supply stays constant, the price and the quantity will drop. It's not happening. And these very intelligent analysts are saying, why not? We're expecting housing prices to collapse any day now. And I said, well, here's the problem. You have to look at the aggregate demand number, and it's not just Ward and June Cleaver going out trying to buy a house. These are numbers that include foreign buyers of homes, and it also includes institutional money, private equity money, and speculative money, and that gets added to the traditional base of home buyers. And before you know it, you have a lot more demand than you thought you did, but it's shifted. It's not metaphorically Ward and June Cleaver, a traditional American family from 100 years ago, literally almost 100 years ago, that would be considered the demand, the largest component of demand in the demand curve. You have to add the new money. And this is different money, and it's institutional money. And average American people who want to buy a home are going to have a hard time dealing with international private equity funds and international buyers. Like there was a metric out, I think I talked about this yesterday or the day before, that 15% of the homes purchased in the U.S. were purchased by Chinese purchasers. Well, that was $78 billion in homes that were purchased by the Chinese. But the Canadians were right behind them at 14%. So people from Canada coming down and buying. So if you have the Chinese and you have the Canadians, it's getting to be 30% of the existing homes that are purchased by foreign buyers. And that's what distorts the demand curve. And that's why we're seeing this median price of housing continue to increase when aggregate demand is falling off from the American buyer. Because if you look at the average income of the Ward and June Cleaver family unit, okay? Effectively, their take-home pay has been flat since the 1970s. It's very, very difficult to see major bumps in anybody's take-home pay. Now, you can switch careers, maybe, in business, you can do well in business, but the average wage earner, if you take averages and medians, all of this type of stuff that economists and financial people look at, what you're realizing is the take-home pay isn't keeping up with the prices. So there are fewer and fewer people that can afford to buy houses. And that opens a gap for foreign buyers and institutional buyers and speculative buyers, people who buy a house of 14% loan and they flip it in 3 months and make money. Everybody makes money. You're competing with that. And then short-term rentals as well. That's a phenomenon that didn't exist 20 years ago. But so many homes in so many markets have been purchased by short-term rental investors. And those are homes that are not effectively owned by, a traditional family unit or whatever, however you define your family unit. It doesn't have to be Ward and June. It can be anybody. The point is, if you're looking at a family unit that's trying to buy a house and you're competing with this speculative money and this institutional money, you got some real competition. And that is an interesting political problem. And that's why we're seeing things like President Trump. He's demanding that the Fed cut the rates. Now, to be honest, it's a very complicated mechanism. We have entrusted the Federal Reserve, which is privately owned by the banks, to maintain the economy and affect monetary policy. But it's not driven by Congress, not driven by the White House. It's theoretically independent. And you can see the rub between an independent Fed and the President of the United States, who's looking at the welfare of all Americans. That's one of the important jobs of the President of the United States. If you read the Constitution, and I suggest everybody crack open a copy and read it. It's a little bit archaic, a little bit complex. There's millions of pages of case law trying to interpret it. But the point is, the President of the United States is chief executive, and it's his or her job to go out and run the economy in such a way that it's for the benefit of the people, okay? Not the benefit of the in crowd, but the benefit of the people. And that's what President Trump is doing. Remarkably populist president from a conservative background, remarkably populist. And this is a good thing. So President Trump says, cut the rates, cut the rates, cut the rates. Well, that's easier said than done. And there are some reasons why cutting the rates, as I pointed out over the 2.5 years of this show, the rates are basically structured across a timeline. If you think about short-term money from the federal government, a 1 month T-bill and a 30-year bond, the interest rates are lower for the short-term money than they are for the higher money, which means if you lend the federal government money for 30 years, you get a higher interest rate because there's more risk, because a lot can happen in 30 years. If you lend them the money for a month, probably not much is going to happen. So you get a low interest rate. There's less risk. It's that risk premium. Well, when you start to look at the yield curve, which is effectively the spread between the lowest, shortest, cheapest money and the most expensive, longest money, it's linear. So if you want to carve out a rate reduction for mortgages, and mortgages key on the 10-year bond. Here's the 1 month bond, and here's the 30-year bond. The 10-month is right about in the middle, and what you can't have is a line that goes like this. It's an inverted yield curve problem within the yield curve. It's not that easy. What effectively has to happen is you have to lower all of the interest. Now, from the Treasury's perspective, that would be just great, because every time they refinance debt, especially on the longer bonds, they are going from very cheap money from 30 years ago or 10 or 15 years ago to much higher rates today. And if you could lower that curve, the federal treasury could borrow for less interest. And we're already paying like $1.2 trillion a year in interest on the debt we have. That's the $37 trillion in debt. Well, the interest payments on that debt, of course, is 1.2 trillion, and you could start to lower that expense, the treasury expense, by lowering the rates. But if you lower the rates, and there's no reason not to, you're going to stimulate the economy. And that means there's going to be more inflation in the economy. And that means that there will be winners and losers. If you have a house, or you have assets, or you have something of value that goes up, when inflation comes along, the value will go up, and boy, you'll be riding the curve. It's like, a rising tide floats all boats. Well, if you happen to have a boat, your boat will float. If you don't happen to have a boat and you're standing at the bottom of the harbor, when the tide comes in, the water comes up, and you're done for. That's the problem. Not everybody has an asset that will go up, and there's some political and there's some social issues that Congress will wrestle with, because Congress is a collection of all sorts of people from all different backgrounds in the United States, and some people are poor, and some people are rich, and some people are this, and some people are that, and it's always a debate. That's the whole purpose of a democracy. You send representatives to Washington, and they debate the issues of the day, and something is passed, and then the president signs it into law and then administers that law. Well, it's very complicated when it comes to the haves and the have-nots in our society, and that's why inflation, while if you are asset laden, you really aren't worried about inflation, because as much as it costs you at the grocery store, you're making up for it on the increased value of the property you're holding. So it's sort of it doesn't matter. And if you're smart, you can capitalize on that. Well, it's a big problem in the housing market. And that's why I saw something interesting today about President Trump talking about wanting to eliminate the capital gains tax on residential homes. And I thought that is a brilliant idea, because whether you know it or not, if you buy a home and it goes up because of inflation, which was created by the government, and all of a sudden you want to sell it someday, well, there's an exemption. The first $250,000 for individuals and the first $500,000 for people filing jointly is sheltered from tax. And anything above that, you have to pay tax on the gain in value of your home. And of course, that's a real disincentive to sell your home and try to downsize. If you got this great big capital gains tax that you have to pay, which could be between 15 and 20%, depending upon all sorts of Internal Revenue Code issues. But the point is, by President Trump advocating the repeal of capital gains tax on the sale of residential homes and demanding lower interest rates, what he's trying to do is stimulate the economy through the stimulation of the housing market. And I think that would be very good policy, because the American citizen is tapped. If you look at their take-home pay being flat since the 1970s, percentage-wise increase, and you look at the fact that the unemployment is still bouncing around 4.7%, and inflation is already at 2.7%. This is good policy. Now, the question is, why doesn't the Fed react? And if the Fed is playing political games, they're probably going to lose that game. So it's very interesting. Yeah, I'm going to take a break here, and I'm going to talk about another important issue. I'll be right back. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
Okay, so to finish the thought on the housing situation, I wanted to point out one more fact reported in the news today. 87% of mortgage holders, current mortgage holders, are holding a mortgage below the current mortgage rates. So 87% of the people, if they sold their home, would have to go and take a higher rate mortgage. So 87% of the people aren't real thrilled about having to do that. And interestingly, 2/3 of the mortgage holders in the US, that's 2/3, are paying 5% or less. So nobody is going to trade in a 5% mortgage to go pay a 7% mortgage and take more take-home pay out of your pocket to pay a higher mortgage payment every month unless you really have to. So with 2/3 of the people under 5%, they're not budging unless they have to. And 87% of mortgage holders are below what you can get a mortgage for today. They're not real enthusiastic about moving. So that's why President Trump is saying, hey, lower the rates, lower them back to 4%, 3%, back in the good old days. And what that would do would be an explosion in sales of existing homes, as well as stimulate the building of new homes, and the U.S. housing market would take off. It's all about the interest rates, because ultimately your interest rate impacts directly your take-home pay, which is all the money you have to spend every month on housing, auto insurance, health insurance, all the stuff. And that's why it's really an important policy decision. So we'll see what happens. But he can't just cut the 10-year bond rate. And the Fed could do that tomorrow. They could go into the open market, the Federal Open Market desk in New York, and they can start fooling around with the 10 years and drop that to like 2.5%. And of course, that would really, really reduce mortgage interest rates fast. In a week, they would adjust. The problem is people investing for 10 years are getting 2%, and their 15 years are getting, maybe 4 or 5%. There won't be anybody funding into the 10% market or the 10-year market because the interest rates are too low. You can do better a little longer. You could probably do better a little shorter than a 10-year. So effectively, the Fed has to drop the whole yield curve has to flatten like it was back 5 years ago. And that has policy consequences across the board. Although it would save the American U.S. Treasury a ton of money in their refinancing. So we'll see. I think President Trump's a very effective negotiator, so we'll see what happens. Speaking of negotiations, President Trump also cut a deal with the Japanese, where apparently it's going to be a 15% tariff, and they've committed to putting $550 billion into the American economy. Keep in mind, Nippon Steel purchased U.S. Steel. That was allowed to go through, and adding another $550 billion in investment, basically factories and institutional, factories and commercial property. That's a big deal because you're getting foreign investment coming into the U.S. At the same time, the U.S. Treasury will be collecting 15% on every Japanese car made in Japan and sold in the United States. So it's that 10 to 15% sales tax I've been talking about. And this is President Trump's big global vision, is shifting the cost of government away from the individual taxpayers and more toward an import tax, an import tax. You want to sell Japanese cars, and there's 7 brands of Japanese cars, kind of impressive actually. And all of those 7, of course, will pay the federal government 15%, and they'll sell their cars in the United States. Well, what does that do? Well, it collects money for the Treasury, but it also incentivizes the Japanese out of that $550 billion to build some more plants in the United States, and they don't have to worry about the tariff, but those cars are made here in the U.S., and that's what we want. We want more factories in the U.S., we want more American people working in those factories. We want those great big union paychecks, or at least those, maybe perhaps not union, but the point is we want those big paychecks that are sustainable wages. And the more development and the more manufacturing that happens here, you can avoid the tax. And that's what is effectively happening. I've been saying this since the Trump tariff negotiations began. Is, you don't look at that as a permanent revenue situation in the tariff wars, 30% here, 50% there. That was all negotiations. But what ultimately happens is you create a global tariff system where if you want to make something in your country and sell it in our country, you pay the government 10 to 15% tariff and go right ahead, open market, have a good time. That's where we're going. And I think this Japanese model is very, very important. And keep in mind, the Japanese, they have developed an amazing industrial base. And it goes back to World War II. Unfortunately, we dropped some nuclear bombs on them to end the war. But the relationship with Japan since then has been nothing but remarkable and spectacular between the United States and the Japanese. Japanese economy and the Japanese manufacturing base, their technology, their superior ability to build quality products. It started out with, back in the old days, we'd buy Japanese radios and stereos. It was kind of cool. But when you look at Japanese cars today, they're second to none. They're absolutely wonderful cars. And there's a global demand for those cars. And of course, Americans love them. If you drive on, take a look out your window when you're driving, you see a lot of Japanese cars on the road. We want that relationship to stay strong because good, strong economics makes for good friends instead of enemies. And we want to see a happy and prosperous Japan, just like they want to see a happy and prosperous America. So it's a good thing. So we're hoping that this is really setting the benchmark. And it was a little surprising the Japanese would yield to a 15% rather than a 10%. But I'll let President Trump negotiate that. He's doing a very good job. But it's a very interesting model that's emerging. Another thing to remember is that Japan, being a very dear friend of ours, is the largest holder of federal debt. That $37 trillion I keep talking about? Well, they own a little over $1.2 trillion of that is held by the Japanese Treasury as investment. So effectively, we don't want them pushing the sell button and selling all those bonds on day one, or the Federal Reserve open market desk will have a meltdown. But we want to keep that relationship harmonious, where if we're going to issue massive amounts of debt on profligate spending that is just grossly wasteful, then we want at least our friends to own it. Because keep in mind, the Chinese have just about 900 billion-ish in debt of their own that they own. So between the Japanese and the Chinese, a better part of $2 trillion of our 37 trillion is held offshore in the Asian area. And that's why it's very important to keep these relationships sound. And of course, the Japanese understand that as well. They don't let a lot of foreign made goods into Japan because they want to stimulate the Japanese economy by manufacturing and exporting. Japan's a fascinating place. Raw materials come to the island, they get turned into amazing goods, and they get sold. And that's the Japanese business model. It's superb. It's been very successful over the years. And that's why it's very interesting to see that the Japanese, will they open their markets? We'll see. But with a 15% reciprocal tariff, certainly would be profitable to their government. And of course, there's been a little upheaval in the Japanese government from time to time. The pendulum swings like in every country. But we'll see what happens. But it's a good bit of news. The next thing I want to talk about is the electrical power situation. It's really something that we have to pay attention to in the United States. And I'm not just talking through my microphone here when I talk about power. I spent 3 years as a regulator regulating the utilities in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's always been on the cutting edge of utility regulation. We sort of invented it here. We're very good at it. And we think about it, and our models are used nationally by other states. So when I speak about regulated electric power, I tend to come from a background that suggests I know what I'm talking about. So the point is, we're looking at the regions in the United States, and the United States is broken into regions for stability purposes. And the PJM used to be the Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, but it's the PJM region is effectively 65 million people on the East Coast, and it includes 13 states and the District of Columbia. So there's a whole lot of people in the PJM, and they're putting out notices again that their power system is stressed to the max. Especially we're looking at a heat dome or a heat bubble this week. The weather term du jour, it's hot. Okay, it's the summertime, it's hot. And then when it gets hot, people turn on the air conditioning. And when they turn on the air conditioning and the AI factories are running their servers, the demand for electrons can outstrip the supply of electrons. Now, the electrical system is people don't quite understand how the electrical system in the United States works. You plug your TV in the wall or your toaster, and you turn it on, it works. You don't think about the mechanics behind it, but the mechanics, and I'll talk about this tomorrow because maybe the lights will go off today. But the point is, it's a very unstable system that has been stabilized through technology, but it's something to really worry about. As a matter of fact, I will talk about this tomorrow because it's an important story. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning into the Eastman Financial Report, and please make a donation at worldviewfoundation.com. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
I'll tell you one little quick story. We had a Worldview Weekend client who lived in California, lost their house, very wealthy guy. He didn't use Bitcoin. He came over here, drove to Arizona with $286,000 worth of his gold because he had no money and no house available. His bank was shut down because he couldn't have access to his bank account.
Was this during the fire? Was this during the fires?
During the fire. Didn't have his driver's license. He lost it. The state wouldn't give him a new license because he had no active mailing address. Real mess. So he came to Arizona to buy a house. He's moving everything over. He said, the only thing I got in my possession that I can get liquid with right now is my gold. I gave him a check for $286,000, and guess what? I didn't need his social, his driver's license. Sort of smiled, and I said, you know, I know you and Brandon talked about how this worked, but boy, this is great. I feel good. I got my money. Nobody bothered me, and I'm protected, and it's private. So you people out there who are sitting on your hands when Wes and I are sending you these requests and Brandon and you are talking to you, you better get active. Because you're going to pay me $4,000 an ounce the end of the year. Trust me.
You better get your. I highly suggest you get your free packet. You don't have to do anything. It's free, no obligation. Just simply go to worldviewgold.com, fill out the form, worldviewgold.com, or just text Wes and give him your name and address and say, I want the free packet. That's all you got to do. 602-558-8585, 602-558-8585.